This episode of Q Point Podcast is pre-recorded, produced and sponsored by Corenna and Quirk, broker at Next Home Experience.
Different views.
I know your story.
From different cues.
Incredible job.
He's David Quirk.
You brought it up.
And she's Corenna Quirk.
Imagine.
This is
Q Point.
Joining us now in studio is Joyce, Director of Advocacy at NEFSA, New England Fishermen's Stewardship Association. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the invite.
Jason joined us here in studio, and we've also caught up with him by phone following his recent meetings in Washington, D.C. to update this conversation. Let's start with the situation involving the Maine Department of Labor and Billy Bob Faulkingham. What are you seeing unfold, and how is it impacting the industry right now?
Well, seeing how it's unfolded on social media, a lot of the fishermen feel as though he has been targeted, and I would say from everything I've seen, he has been. I don't like seeing Billy Bob having to go through this. Between what's happened with him having to go through this and that young boy that was on the boat and making such a big deal about this. But by fighting this, he has drawn attention to it, and it does give an opportunity to address it and rectify it. And I did get an email the other day, as most fishermen did. If you're a fisherman and you're signed up for Department of Marine Resources updates in your emails, got an email the other day from the commissioner, and I appreciated what he wrote. What he communicated to the fishermen is he'll be at each of the next 7 zone council meetings, and he'll be listening for feedback from the zone councils and the public who show up to speak out. And then he's going to go back to the Lobster Advisory Council, which I'm on, and John Druin, our vice president, is on of NEFSA, and he's going to create a subcommittee, and that subcommittee will meet with Department of Labor, a committee from them, as well as DMR, Commissioner Carl Wilson, and see if we can't hammer these issues out so that even though this is an unfortunate situation that has happened, we can hopefully legislatively address this and fix it so it can't be used against the fishermen again.
So if it was a relative, would he be in a different situation?
I believe so. Everything I've studied about this, it appears that taking your own child or a relative on the boat isn't as scrutinized as taking someone else's child, but it makes it very difficult because we come from small communities, just like Billy Bob does. And this young man is a friend of his son, just like when I grew up, there would be guys that would go on my boat that would be friends of mine with my dad. So it was written in a way, these labor laws were written in a way that we all understand that have any age on us. It's so that you don't have a kid working in a sweatshop somewhere building T-shirts. But this isn't China, and these kids aren't there being used necessarily for their cheap labor. It's because you're trying to expose them to the industry so that we can continue this on for another generation. So it's taken completely out of context.
Would that be like a neighbor coming over to mow your lawn and you give him $20 or $30?
Yeah, I would guess. This kind of blew up on social media when Billy Bob addressed this and kind of exposed what he'd been going through. And it really blindsided the industry that someone could be targeted like that. It was very surprising to hear. And if you dig into it more, it does give the indication that he was targeted. But I'm hopeful that through him standing up and saying, hey, I'm not just going to sit down and take this, that the law can be changed so that no one else can be targeted by this in the future for whatever reason.
At what age did you first step on a lobster boat to help out?
I remember being very young. Of course, it was with my dad and my grandfather. I don't think I went with my uncle. I did later on, but I was 5, 6 years old. I remember being on the bulkhead and it was foggy and I got sick. But I also remember good days when it was sunny and nice out. But in our community, I don't see any kids on boats without life jackets on. It's very awkward as a child to be on your parents' boat or an adult's boat because everybody's worried about you falling overboard, so they won't let you get near the edge. They have everything all set up, and at that age, you want to do everything. But I was definitely before 10 years old, I was going out fairly regularly with my dad in the summertime, baiting pockets, trying not to be in the way. And honestly, I don't even think I got paid, but in our generation, you needed help. Your parents said, go, you went. My feeling is that community involvement and family involvement is what helps our communities thrive, because a lot of what we do within our communities, whether it's serving as a selectman or on a volunteer fire department or on a planning board committee, a lot of these things, you might get some compensation or a stipend here or there, but most of it is volunteer work. And that comes from a strong, small community sense of you may not be getting paid for this, but it's what you do within your community to make things work. It is very well represented along the coast by seeing how our kids start out on a boat and learn how to do what they do and not necessarily argue about it. You don't argue with your elders. You do what they tell you, and eventually you figure out that they were looking out for your best interest. As a parent and a grandparent taking my own kids on the boat, we've had them before going on picnics so that they're familiar with the boat and the movement of the boat and being safe. Life jackets on. They have a nap. You put them in a lobster crate. Sounds awful, but they fit in there pretty good if they're little. And you can stuff some blankets and life jackets around them. But my grandson, Elias, he's 7 years old. I took him on the boat last year. He was 6 and did a great job. He'd bait the needles, putting the bait on there and banding lobsters. We didn't have him doing anything on the trap other than occasionally what usually we will do just to get them familiar with it. Every once in a while, you let them push a trap overboard so they understand where to stand safely and everything is going slow. There's nothing risky about it at all. But with me and most people I know that are raised in fishing families, probably between 6 and 9 years old, you put a few days in the summer on your parents or your grandparents or your uncle or your aunt's boat to go with a neighbor. I think it was completely appropriate for Billy Bob to take a 14-year-old boy. I mean, there's some 14-year-old kids that are taller than me that I know of.
And why is early exposure so important in this industry?
As we look at communities and how we sustain them, my feeling is within the fisheries and the opportunity to make a living, you have a bunch of different industries that you can get involved with, but fisheries is the number one industry. And to be safe, kids learn at an early age their balance. They hopefully listen well, and sometimes they don't, and they learn from those mistakes. But you try to guide them from an early age. Stay away from the edge of the boat. Stay away from the rope. Don't lay your knife down that way, or stay away from the pointy end of the knife. Sort of basic things like that. So when they hit high school age and they're really going at it hard on the boat and going really fast, that it's safe. But you start from an early age. It's just like anything else you do with your children. You just try to expose them and guide them in the best way forward so that they can be helpful, and then recognize that. Some will catch on better than others, but eventually they all kind of catch on that they can do a little bit more and what the safe way is to go about that. You might be able to hand them a buoy and they put that in a hot tank. That water is kind of hot, but if they're careful with it and they're being watched, that burns off the grass off of the buoy. There are different tasks on a boat that they can do, but you use your judgment in how to have them help. So it is helpful, but you're also teaching them, thinking down the road 2, 3, 4 years as they gather up this information, that they can be worth something on the boat and be helpful and be able to make a living at it someday.
Let's face it, you live on an island, so there's not a lot of industry there. Fishing is probably important for young kids to stay on the island rather than leaving the island or even leaving the state.
Yes, I agree with that. And my son went to college and met a young lady, and they live out of state. But each one of my children have been working on my boat, and they all gained a good work ethic. Some people would show up to work, and I remember one young man in particular, his parents really wanted him to go on the boat with me because he was getting out of high school. But they kind of wanted him to go to college. So my son was graduating 8th grade, and he was getting ready to go to high school. And this other kid must have been 18 years old. So my son at 14 was showing him, the 18-year-old, the ropes. And then he went with me for about a week. He stayed with us, and he called his parents up and said, I think I want to go to college now. So sometimes it works out in the other direction. But as we strive to have these communities go on and last for generations and generations, that happens best when you integrate young people into the industry that is local, which is fishing, so that they're familiar with it. Even if they go to college, generally speaking, they get in their early 20s and they experience life a little bit, or they might go in the military or something like that. We had a young fella that was in my son's grade. He went in the Marines for a while, but eventually he wanted to come home and go fishing. So we start them young, and it's a good foundation for them in life, even if they don't stay fishing.
So you're heading to the first Lobster Zone meeting with DMR Commissioner Carl Wilson. What do they expect to gain from these meetings?
Well, the meetings are usually held at least twice a year, sometimes 3 times, sometimes 4, all depending on what the issues are. So this is our series of spring meetings that are starting now. By reading the commissioner's letter, an important thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be discussing how we integrate young people on the boats and what they have traditionally done and how do we address that and make sure that the law is changed so that families aren't targeted or somehow persecuted for taking their young people on the boat. So that's going to be a big thing. We have other issues as well that we'll be talking about. We've got an ASMFC meeting coming up in May that the commissioner will be going to. So there are some things that are related to that the department will be sharing with the fishermen. And there might also be some local issues that zone will be sharing with the department. So it's a chance for the department to connect with the representatives of that zone, which may be 7 to 10 local fishermen representing different areas of that zone. And it's a chance for them to talk and express to each other our issues, what's going right, what's going wrong. And then eventually the commissioner brings all of those conversations back to the Lobster Advisory Council, and then we move forward. There are some issues that we are dealing with, but I would say this issue with the Department of Labor is number one on the list by the looks of social media, and I'm confident that our commissioner will be getting on this and addressing it with us. Something I'd also like to say is, as much as this has been very negative on state government, this has really been Department of Labor. It has nothing to do with Department of Marine Resources. They are not part of this issue that Billy Bob has been targeted by, but they are seeking to resolve it. So I appreciate that.
Is that something that the public can attend, those meetings?
Yes, those are open meetings. They're attended usually just by fishermen, but anybody in the public can attend and learn about what's going on if they're interested in any of these issues. But yes, they're open to the public and they last roughly about 2 hours.
You are listening to Q Point Podcast. I'm Corenna Quirk, co-hosting with my husband, David Quirk, and we are having a conversation with Jason Joyce, Director of Advocacy at NEFSA. Jason joined us here in studio, and we've also caught up with him by phone following his recent meetings in Washington, D.C. to update this conversation. You were recently in Washington, D.C. observing the 50th anniversary of the Magnuson-Stevens Act and discussions around the USDA's new Office of Seafood. What stood out to you from those conversations?
What stood out to me as an attendee on behalf of a gracious invitation from Senator Collins, who's always been there and always been accessible to our fishermen and to our fisheries, and I really appreciate that. I would not have been attending on behalf of Maine's fishermen if she had not extended that invitation to me. The gravity of what I experienced was that this is a big deal. Some conversations I've had with fishermen, there's a lot of hesitancy. What does this mean with this? What does it mean with that? There's nothing in regards to this establishment that I can see of an Office of Seafood that is regulatory in any nature. It's only things that are providing access to our fishermen that we've never had access to before. And that is one thing as I come to that realization, going at the USDA office in the Witten building and just seeing there's a lot of heavy hitters at that table and listening to 10 fishermen from the East Coast to the West Coast to the Gulf of America. It was very good. Everything was very well received. A lot of information was shared at that meeting that they listened to. And we have a follow-up meeting on Zoom next week because they wanted more information. So I think that's a good sign. It wasn't just a photo op. We're doing this, and then they're walking in the other direction and not listening. The Secretary of Agriculture's office called and said they want to do a follow-up. So I think that's a good sign as well.
So what other topics came up during that roundtable?
One hot topic that the Secretaries of Agriculture and Commerce and Interior, and there was also the White House Economics Director, a topic that got everyone's attention was the fact that 85% of our seafood is imported and 0.1% is actually tested by the FDA. And of that, 30% fails testing. That was a new stat to a lot of the people that were there. They didn't realize that we were so lax in our testing of imported seafood. And then the thing that I learned there, that a lot of people learned as well, there was a fisherman from Florida who stated that the seafood that fails is given back and shipped back to the sender, which in his assumption would be is it goes on the ship, they unload the rest of the stuff that does pass, and then that boat probably goes into another port and it's unloaded and put on the market. So that got everyone's attention, and they're going to address that sooner rather than later because that's public safety. And one thing that I did last night, I was researching online, and I did a search on imported beef. Now, the USDA inspects imported beef. FDA inspects imported seafood. USDA, between all of their various methods of inspections, claim that they test 100%. Now, how do you have 100% of beef being inspected coming in from anywhere overseas, and then 0.1% of seafood being inspected, and that 30% that fails is sent back, it's not destroyed? That's a discrepancy that I think, obviously, USDA does a better job at inspecting food than the FDA appears to. I don't know if it's a lack of funding or somebody doesn't care, but I'll be bringing that up at our next meeting.
Did they discuss increasing the percentage that they're going to start to inspect? What were the options that they were discussing?
I don't know if there was anybody there from FDA. You had USDA, Interior and Commerce, White House administration. I don't know if there was anybody there representing FDA, but they were surprised by that figure. And that's a figure that anybody can find. I didn't pull it out of my hat. Anybody can find that. And I'm sure we're there within their agencies. They will find the same information that is readily accessible to anyone. So they didn't have an answer for that, but they were surprised. And then they were doubly surprised when they learned from the perspective of the fisherman down in Florida that from his gathering of information that is not destroyed when it fails, and that it is sent back. And that's got to stop. That should be destroyed. If it fails, that should not be given back and then possibly wind up on someone's plate.
Well, maybe the USDA needs to take this process over.
Well, I'm hoping as we do have follow-up meetings coming up, and that is one thing I'm going to mention is you've got a discrepancy. Obviously, this has been consistent on the testing. Nothing has gone up or down. It seems to be year to year. That's the average. And if USDA, if they're doing such a better job on inspecting the beef that USDA, if there's a possibility of it, they should be at least advising FDA on what their processes are. Now, maybe with seafood and beef, food coming into this country, maybe it's a lot easier to test the beef. I don't know. But we need more than 0.1% tested. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Let's pivot to the new federal fisheries bill, which is referred to as the American Seafood Competitiveness Act, sponsored by U.S. Senators Angus King of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. What's your position on this?
Well, that bill was released, I believe it was on March 26th, and I've been a supporter of that. It's a living document. It isn't passed by any means, and there are a lot of things that I think now that this office has been established that probably want to be added to that bill. One thing would be that I mentioned at the meeting was codifying this, put it into statute so that when we inevitably find in the next few years at one time or another, we will have an administration that's not going to be as friendly to fishermen. And they may decide to get rid of this office. So we want this office established. And the way to do that would be to put that within the framework of this bill or another bill. But it would make sense to me where a lot of the things that are addressed in that bill are within this Office of Seafood structure so that the two pair up well. And I'm a commercial fisherman, so a lot of these things, I find them out the same time everybody else does. So I did not know that this office was going to be set up until I got the call from Senator Collins' office. And this is all sort of working together. So I expressed that at the meeting and they listened. And I'm sure there are people further up the chain that know we don't want this to be a flash in the pan sort of thing. And then all of a sudden it ends in 2 years.
When would the money be available to the local lobstermen down there in Deer Island, Stonington?
From attending that meeting, it was implied that that office is established and it was available there. So I started going online yesterday trying to see how someone would apply. And it was quite confusing. Since then, I've talked to the state director for USDA, and they are reaching out to the feds, their federal counterparts, to see how they integrate all of this. I think it's obviously been working on this before, and it's something that they know they have to make the process easy. They have to be able to give that information to groups like New England Fishermen Stewardship Association so we can convey that to our membership and to the fishermen who want to apply. So that's a work in process. But supposedly, with the office established, those access to funds are available now. It's just with our state agency here, I went on the USDA, went to Hancock County, called Ellsworth, ended up going to Bangor, called them. They said, hey, you need to speak to the state director. So they are trying to update their system so that when someone calls about a loan, whether it's through, as I navigated the website, USDA kind of pushed me to FSA. And in trying to navigate this on where a person would apply actually for something like a new lobster boat or a used lobster boat or to refinance their lobster boat. Some fishermen are stuck in variable rate loans, whether it's through Farm Credit or some other lending institution, and they would like to refinance for a fixed rate, just like farmers can do with their farms or with their equipment. So they are updating it. But as of right now, I don't know how many other people have reached out, but I'm reaching out to make sure that the system works. And then as it is updated and it does work, I'll be reaching out to our association and our membership and to fishermen at large, folks within the state, and letting them know how things are advancing so that we can get that information out there.
That's great. Did they give you a timeline on that?
No, I spoke to the state director today, and they're going to make it the number one priority today to get those answers that I was asking. Once I expressed that I was at that meeting and what was going on, they had seen the announcement, but they weren't sure how it applied to them because they've never done this before. And then they explained how, well, if you're an aquaculture operation and you have this form and that form. I said, well, no. I said, this is allowing now commercial fishermen to access what aquaculture has accessed in the past. So a lot of those things need to be updated. And I think everyone is realizing that from one end of the country to the other. So we're giving them some time, obviously, to update things, but everybody is doing their best to make sure that those programs that were previously only accessible to aquaculture or obviously farmers will now be accessible to commercial fishermen.
Did they give you a cap per fisherman, a money amount?
No. I did see as I went through the FSA part of the website, there was one loan process that you could not make more than $900,000 a year, which shouldn't be a problem for most fishermen this year. If you start navigating that, there are a lot of funding streams for various things that maybe there is one program in particular they would have, in my case, like a lobsterman apply for a boat. I'm sure there'll be a different funding application for a dock, and I'm sure there'll be a different resource probably for, say, lobster processors.
As far as those loans, are there going to be special interest rates?
The overall feeling that I get as a fisherman sitting in on these meetings that, yes, there would be a better rate whether you go through a bank and the bank is the intermediary and has access to federal loans that are a lower rate than the bank could offer on their own, or if it's through possibly Farm Credit offering fixed rates and longer terms, which is another huge thing. If you had a similar rate as what you normally would get at the bank, but you could stretch it out for 30 or 40 years, that gets your payment down. Be a good steward of your money. When you're having a good season, you can pay down towards the principal. And then during the lean years, like last year, when profitability is down, you wouldn't be at the point of, like some guys are, of possibly losing their boats.
You are listening to Q Point Podcast. I'm Corenna Quirk, co-hosting with my husband, David Quirk, and we are having a conversation with Jason Joyce, Director of Advocacy at NEFSA. The last time you were on, you were talking about lobster hatcheries. Would that be an opportunity as well?
It might be. And in fact, on that note, I can't remember if we talked about it or not, but we were seeking funding for 10 hatcheries up and down the coast through a grant through Representative Golden's office. And it kind of morphed a little bit, but we ended up getting a grant submitted through the University of Maine to establish 3 hatcheries at Down East Institute, the Darling Center, and the Booth Bay Lab. And they're going to begin studying these smaller larval stage lobsters to study the efficacy of hatcheries and the positive effect that they can have on the wild stock. It's a little bit of a different approach rather than just going in full bore and producing as many stage 4 lobsters as they can and releasing them. So it'll be more measured, but it's a good foundational start on establishing hatcheries and finding best operating practices, as well as studying that efficacy. tagging those little lobsters so they can try to come up with some metrics so that we can better understand how many of those lobsters make it beyond that fourth stage and get up closer to market size. Of course, this is early in the process, but I would say that USDA would have some grants that would help with that as well.
So does that help small businesses or just larger businesses?
The way I read the bill, it would help both. So smaller owner-operator businesses like a lobster fisherman going out and investing in his business, he would have access to better rates and more opportunities. And then if you have, say, a larger operator like a processing plant wants to set up, or even possibility of maybe a hatchery, I believe that it would help all stages of the fishery business, from the smallest individual operator with a boat to the larger processors that, as fishermen have stated over the years, that they're upset that the Canadians have had more help establishing processing plants in Canada. Now, those same abilities to receive more favorable financing and grants through the SDA should be available to those larger players here that would like to set up processing plants as well.
Well, we want to acknowledge the heartbreaking news out of Steuben, Maine. A lobster fisherman was reported missing last night, and we've since learned his body was found this morning. Our thoughts are with his family, his fellow fishermen, and the entire coastal community during this incredibly difficult time. We will have more information before this airs, but are you hearing anything?
I haven't. I do know people down there, but I heard last night that someone was missing, and I've learned his name is Tommy West, and I don't know him. I do know there's a local girl here that married a fella whose last name is West that lives in that area. Probably a member of his family. My condolences to them, and I'm sure that family is grieving. But I don't know the details. What I have heard is it possibly fell overboard going between his skiff and his boat. So I don't think it was in the act of fishing. I think it was something that maybe happened where he fell overboard there in the harbor. But it's a tragedy, and there's been an awful lot of them this year. So our thoughts and prayers are going out to that family as they're going through a grieving right now.
Thank you for listening to Part 1 with Jason Joyce, Director of Advocacy at NEFSA. Make sure to tune in tomorrow, Sunday, May 3rd at 6:30 a.m. on VOM, The Voice of Maine.
You've been listening to Q Point.
Follow us at qpointpodcast.com or on your favorite streaming app.
This is where you can get the news from the people who make the news.
Make sure to join us next time.
We hope you tune in.
Q Point Podcast invites guests and candidates from all parties to join the conversation. The views, information, opinions, and comments expressed during this program do not necessarily represent those of the host, Q Point Podcast, associates, affiliates, and CQRE LLC.
Thanks for being a part of the conversation. The most important voices aren't always the loudest ones. They're the voices of everyday people, raising families, running businesses, serving their towns. That's who we want to hear from. Share your ideas with us online, and let's make sure those voices are never left out. Find us on Facebook or on X or at qpointpodcast.com. We look forward to hearing from you.
Catch every episode at qpointpodcast.com or wherever you stream. Tune in and tell your friends.